Good morning and welcome. My name is Sarah Latimer Irvin, and I'm the board chair for the YWCA of Greater Atlanta. The mission of our organization is to eliminate racism, empower women, and promote peace, justice, freedom, and dignity for all. One of the methods we use to advance toward those goals involves your participation in forums like the one that is about to begin. We're here to discuss why DE&I should be part of your DNA. We will examine the topic from the viewpoints of both frontline experts and individuals. But we begin this program by issuing our sincere thanks. We appreciate the fact that you have made this an important part of your day and are grateful for your shared desire to move the world toward a place where diversity, equity, and inclusion are implemented in every aspect of our lives.
Thank you, Sarah. Welcome and good morning. Thank you for joining us for an important discussion about the topics of diversity, equity, and inclusion and how they intersect with race and gender. We are heartened by the fact that you will spend a portion of your business day virtually here with the YWCA of Greater Atlanta and sincerely appreciate your support. Here to officially begin the program is the organization's CEO, Ms. Sharman Goins.
Good morning, everyone. Let me thank our board chair, Sarah Latimer Irving, for the introduction to today's program and recognize our board of directors for their leadership that they provide to YWCA of Greater Atlanta in all of our initiatives. We want to thank our corporate sponsors, UPS, our distinguished sponsor, Georgia Power, and the affiliate sponsor, PNC Bank, for the support that they've provided specifically for today's program. And of course, we are eternally grateful to our community, reformer, and ally sponsors for standing with us in support this year. Thank you, and thank all of you for being here virtually, for your commitment to our organization's objectives. It's a privilege to address you as the CEO of YWCA of Greater Atlanta. We are here because the topics we discuss over the next 2 hours are important in our lives. We are an organization that understands the need for trust and compassion when publicly talking about issues of race and gender. That's why we created this forum called Conversations. This is the 8th year we're taking time to examine a specific aspect of race and gender. We continue to talk about these topics because they have a huge impact on us as individuals and group members, and because they affect almost every decision we make. The intersection of race and gender affect where we choose to live and even our choice in careers. Race and gender often impact the lives of our children and even the educational opportunities afforded them. Discussions about these two topics get misidentified and manipulated. But the only way to examine them effectively is to start with one person, you. Ask the person you see in the mirror what should happen every time race and gender intersect, and how do they affect our understanding of diversity, equity, and inclusion. We at YWCA of Greater Atlanta believe that DEI should be a part of our DNA. I personally believe these topics have affected us earlier in our lives and in even more ways that we may understand. For example, this is a picture of me at age 14. Unknowingly, I had already started a trailblazing journey of equity and inclusion. You see me smiling. But at this time in my life, I was not thrilled about leaving the sanctity of a certain future at my all-black high school in Dublin, Georgia, to help to integrate the town's white high school. You see, I was the youngest of 8. I'd had 2 brothers who had been valedictorians. My other siblings were great students. My family was well known in the community and respected. And I was kind of set to inherit the keys to this kingdom. But then my mother decided that educational equity was more important than my teenage expectations. At first, only a selected few black students were even allowed to integrate the white school. I was in the second group, and I'm here to tell you it was not the high school experience of my dreams. White students refused to sit either in the chair in front of me or behind me. One day I went into the class and my chair was actually pushed outside the door. After my first day of school, I came home and I simply cried. But did my mother make the right decision? Of course she did. Were my experiences traumatic? Yes. Did it make a difference? In many more ways than I can recount. And actually, some of the same white students who had rejected and shunned me had a change of heart when they found out I was a really good student and could help them with their studies. By my junior year, a new school had been built and only one public high school was in Dublin, and everything was fully integrated. There was no white school and no black school. Those experiences were my introduction to inclusion. We're having conversations today because no one in the 21st century, at school, at work, in the neighborhood, should live through learning about inclusion the way it was introduced into my life. What happened to me at school was something I had to experience alone. And even though my mom had signed those papers to make me a trailblazer, neither she nor my father could really counsel me because they had had no experience at integrated schools. But they both had faith in my fortitude. They knew something that I came to realize later, that I had a fully formed personality that would not wilt under pressure. But still, I had to find my own voice. In retrospect, I understand the ability to do so helped me as I made my way through the communications industry in corporate America. However, what I didn't know at that age was that there were people around me who really did want to hear my voice. Now, I realize that being heard is an important part of making DEI a part of your DNA, and that's why it's the topic of today's forum. We're here to help you learn how to make your voice heard on the topics of race and gender. Now, it doesn't mean that everybody's going to want to hear your voice, but it does mean that you won't be alone, a voice crying out in the wilderness. There are more people willing to hear what you have to say than you may realize. The voices supporting DE&I surprised the governor of Colorado and were partially responsible for righting a wrong that allowed the people who murdered a young black man to escape justice. More than 8,500 individuals sat down and wrote letters or cards imploring Jared Polis to arrest paramedics and police officers who beat up a young autistic black man and then injected him with ketamine in 2019. Elijah McClain was known in his community as playing his violin to rescue cats. After his murder, the policy of injecting ketamine was legally ended, and on September 1st, the officers and paramedics responsible for his death were formally charged. Those arrests may have taken place because 8,500 people who didn't know each other, who didn't even know Elijah McClain, or even live in Colorado for that matter, decided to use their voice to see that equity in the form of justice was applied. They wrote because they thought what happened to him was wrong and they wanted to do something. Individually, they used their voices, but collectively, they became a roar. We want to inspire you, each of you, to do the same. The mission of YWCA of Greater Atlanta is to eliminate racism, empower women, and promote peace, justice, freedom, and dignity for all. For that to happen, at least two things need to take place. First, each one of us has to acknowledge that problems exist concerning race and gender. Racism is real. Genderism is real. Then we have to talk about it. We have to talk about who it affects. We have to talk about where it exists, and in forums like this, you talk about ways to eliminate the conflicts. It doesn't take Herculean efforts to make a change. It's the little things that we as individuals can do that will make us better, make us whole, and to really put a stake in this fight against racism, genderism, and any other kind of ism out there. Change doesn't always come from people with fancy titles or work in powerful places. Sometimes all you have to do is be willing to make a move. We are people. We are not groups of people. We as individuals always have the responsibility to be a better version of ourselves every single day. This is something that has to happen individually and collectively to make our homes, our school, our workplaces, our cities, our country a better place to live. So how do we change false narratives about race and gender? By listening to each other, by learning from experts. And we have four of the best experts with us here today. I call them our dream team. Each is a professional who understands diversity, equity, and inclusion from a personal and professional perspective. They're going to spend the next 40 minutes or so discussing DE&I from views you may not have heard before. Then it'll be your turn. We're going to then go into our separate and go into our virtual breakout rooms where each of you will have a chance to answer some questions under the guidance of a facilitator. As I said at the beginning, we're here because the topics of race and gender are important. It's my sincere hope that you will find nuggets of DE&I wisdom today that you can apply in every aspect of your life. Now let's segue to our panel presentation. Allow me to introduce our moderator for today. Stacy McCall is the Assistant Vice President, Deputy Diversity Officer, and EEO Counselor for the Federal Reserve Bank here in Atlanta. Her employer credits her with making it a more inclusive and equitable workplace. Her position allows her to interact with the bank's 1,700 employees, their external vendors, and their consultants. She reviews the processes of external vendors and see who they use to hire minorities and women. She also confers with senior management. One of her biggest professional successes has been the establishment of the Atlanta Federal Reserve Bank's ERN, Employee Resource Network. These are employee-led groups that are formed around shared interests. Stacy is originally from Texas, and she credits sports with providing her first understanding about DEI principles. Stacy says that team sports help you learn how to embrace diversity and inclusion early because all members on the team are needed to participate fully in order for it to be successful. You see the enthusiasm for sports in this picture of her from San Antonio as a middle school basketball player. Please welcome our moderator for today's conversations, Ms. Stacy McCall.
Thank you, Sharman. I appreciate that, and thank you for bringing back a very good memory from San Antonio, Texas. I've played team sports for a long time, but I have a dream team here with me today, and I am excited about an opportunity to talk about something I am just as passionate about. Basketball is one thing, but diversity, equity, and inclusion, that's something else that I'm very passionate about. My dream team is on the stage with me. I have a post player, I have a point guard, and I have a shooting guard. So I think we're going to score a lot of points today. So first I want to introduce Soon-Mi. Soon-Mi Kim. We have three actually, but I'm going to start with Soon-Mi Kim. She is the Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer for the Omnicom Public Relations Group. Soon-Mi drives DE&I strategies across the agency's 17 global brands. Before working for Omnicom, Soon-Mi was a DE&I Executive Vice President for Porter Novelli. There, she developed award-winning programs. She is a recognized leader in the public relations arena. This year, PR Week named her to the 2021 Power List as one of the top 50 communicators. This is just the most recent in a string of honors she has received. Soon-Mi grew up in Fayetteville, North Carolina, and what you see is a picture of her at age 6. Her memory of that time is of a teacher describing her as shy because she chose to be judicious about her surroundings and how she engaged with people. She felt the description was biased, and it has stayed with her all these years. Welcome, Soon-Mi.
Thank you, Stacy. Great to be here. Thanks so much for being our incredible moderator.
We'll see how that goes. Next on the panel is Deja Barnett. She is the Vice President of Strategic Communications for the United Parcel Service, which we know as UPS. This is a woman who counsels CEOs and builds strategies that drive transformation. She is so adept at using storytelling to reach her target objectives with UPS that PR Week magazine described her as a pro who represents the future of public relations. In addition to helping the DE&I team at UPS, Deja is the executive sponsor for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee for Urban Skin RX, where she also sits on the board. Before coming to Urban RX and UPS, Deja was the first person to head D&I for the Metro Atlanta Chamber of Commerce. She was the architect behind the Atlanta Action for Racial Equity Group, which addresses the effects of systemic racism in the community and the workplace. Deja started her DE&I leadership journey with the world's largest retailer, Walmart. Her picture is from Clinton, Maryland, with her baby brother. Do we have that picture? Finally, I'm going to introduce Zinga Shaw. Zinga joins us with a wealth of experience and a track record of DE&I accomplishments in a variety of industries. She is a former Global Chief Inclusion and Diversity Officer for Starbucks and held the same position with the Atlanta Hawks, which made her the first DE&I officer in the NBA, the National Basketball Association. just in case. Sports Business Journal described her as a game changer in sports. She has brought her formidable DE&I skills to other industries as well, including publishing, cable television, and most recently, public relations. Zinga counts recruiting and talent acquisition among her specialties. But she is also very well respected in the workforce planning, leadership development, and of course, implementing strategies that empower the tenets of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Her picture, I'm not sure what age that is, 13? But let her tell you about what DE&I meant during that period in her life.
Well, thank you, first of all, Stacy, for bringing us together, and thank you to Charmin and the YWCA for such a phenomenal event. I will just go back to age 13 and think about what was happening in my life at the time. Entering a teenage years, I think it's very challenging for anybody entering your teenage years, but for me it was specifically challenging because I was in a private school that was predominantly white. I happened to be the only black person in my class, and I felt very different. I felt excluded in many ways. I felt like I had to try my very best to fit in, even if it was fitting in with things that I didn't necessarily agree with or things that didn't resonate with me. And so I would just say that period in my life was a time where I started to find my voice. And I asked a lot of questions to my parents about why I was different, why they decided to send me to that place, but ultimately how I could make the best of the situation. And I think that has resonated with me in my journey through life. There have been many times that I have been the only in a room, and I have oftentimes felt different. But what I've realized over time is that different doesn't mean bad. Different can be good in many ways because you're bringing a new perspective to the table. But to your earlier point, it's important to use your voice. And to Charmin's point, we have to lean into using our voices in this particular moment in time and recognize that we can't do this work alone. And that's why I love this panel. I've known Disha for many years. We were in college at the same time, and I've known Soon Me for many years as well, and you, Stacy. And I would just say, sitting amongst a group of such accomplished practitioners and sharing ideas, that's the only way that we're gonna make changes in society. We can't do this in our own heads, and we can't do it alone.
Thank you for that, Zinga. And like you said, I think we're amongst friends, we're amongst practitioners, but I do want to level set for everyone else in the audience. We're gonna just share a few working definitions that we're going to work with around diversity, equity, and inclusion. We're going to use one from someone who's local, the father of diversity management, Dr. R. Roosevelt Thomas, rest his soul, defined diversity as any collective mixture characterized by differences, similarities, and their related tensions and complexities. Because within diversity, we know there are differences and similarities, but there are also tensions. Inclusion is a strategy for recognizing and leveraging diversity to create fair, equitable, healthy, and high-performing organizations or communities where all individuals are respected, they feel engaged, motivated, and their contributions are valued. And finally, equity is fair treatment, access, opportunity, and advancement for all people, where one's identity cannot predict the outcome. So let's talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion and how we can make it part of our DNA. In its simplest forms, we know diversity is a fact, inclusion is an action, and equity is a choice. So I'm going to open up the questions. Thank goodness I get to be the question asker today. And Su-Ming, I would like to start with you.
All right.
You've been in many organizations. In your experience, in any of your experiences, how has your organizations helped to create a workplace culture where everyone feels valued, everyone feels heard, and where an appreciation and respect for differences is the expectation?
Yeah, thanks so much for the question, Stacey. And can I just say once again, thank you, YWCA. And I am so excited to be with these two amazing women here. And I'm dying to just kind of cut up and just have a laugh with all of you. But this is a very serious topic. And your question is a great one in terms of you bring up culture. We were just talking actually a little bit earlier about the importance of taking an approach in terms of diversity, equity, inclusion, not just as some type of siloed type of action, but something that really is about the entire transformation of an organization. And we really talk about, we kind of jokingly use the word TWD for total world domination. I guess we shouldn't use that term exactly, but the idea behind that is that, yes, how do we get ingrained, diversity ingrained in every single thing that we do? And so part of that, you brought up the point of safety, psychological safety, the emotional kind of balance that's needed for people to show up fully as themselves. And a word that maybe isn't thrown around too much in corporate circles is this word love. So I'll harken back to a campaign that we did a few years ago. It was right after the 1-year anniversary of Charlottesville. And for a lot of people, our eyes were opened to like, wow, this is pretty crazy what's going on here. And now there's going to be a 1-year anniversary that celebrates this, that this is going to be a natural thing that's going to be happening in this country. One of the things that we did within our organization is like, okay, we are going to be bombarded by hate. What can we do in our storytelling capacity to share stories of overcoming that kind of hate with love? And so people did. They trusted us with their stories. They trusted us with their kind of deepest parts of who they are. And that simple act of sharing and trusting us and being vulnerable then opens up the opportunity for others to do that. We call that campaign We Stand for Love. And it's just one example that where communications and storytelling and really giving people that space and trust can I think, be transformative.
Thank you for that. Deja, same question. Just throughout your experiences, just that workplace culture, how do you build that? What are some solid examples that we could share with our audience about things that you do, whether it's in your current organization or your other experiences around folks? We want everybody to feel heard and valued and have that sense of equity.
Yeah, so I think that when I read this question in the prep, my mind went immediately to actually my experience at Walmart. And I think today we talk a lot about courageous conversations. I know Nzinga has done a beautiful job bringing those really to the forefront in Atlanta, frankly. I mean, I think everybody has copied Nzinga and has launched courageous conversations in most workplaces here in this market, which is amazing, right, to create a forum where people can actually use their voice and speak their truth. But when I was at Walmart, it was many years ago, I started there in 2007, at the time, the company already had diversity goals in place for people who were directors and above. There was true accountability to being a leader at every level of leadership. If you had people reporting into you, you were expected to really embrace the core tenets of diversity, equity, and inclusion. You were asked to have mentees who had different dimensions of diversity than you. You were asked to make sure that you had, diverse hiring pools, diverse candidate slates, diverse interview slates, and there was an accountability. You did not get your bonus or your full bonus if you did not. And so I think that the accountability piece, when we talk about holding people, managers accountable to creating spaces where love is there and at the core and people can bring their whole selves to work unabashedly, I think is very, very important. It's one thing that for me has been critical, even when I think about the leaders who have made me feel like I can bring my whole self to work and truly contribute and be valued.
Thank you for that. Nzinga, I'm going to put it out there because Deja started. You have done a lot of stuff around the city to show that example of how organizations can bring their whole selves to work. I don't know which one you're going to pick from because you have several. But can you share some examples?
Well, sure, absolutely. And I'll take myself out of the equation and just talk about what leadership from the top looks like. In my opinion, I think that diversity, equity, and inclusion really becomes part of the organizational fabric when the CEO is a champion for it, because it really starts from the top. And so I'm thinking about my time at the Atlanta Hawks when I served as Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer, and it was not a good time for our franchise. in the National Basketball Association. We were going through a public-facing racial crisis. Very senior leaders of our organization were outed for disparaging the African American community, whether it was via email, whether it was on during meetings, a variety of settings where this was constantly taking place. And our CEO, he wrote a letter in the AJC, an open letter to the city of Atlanta. And the title of the letter said, "We are very sorry." And that Steve Koonin is his name. And Steve began to detail all of the things that we did wrong. We did not create an organization that was fair, that was equitable. We did not talk about our employees in a manner that was acceptable. And we weren't honest with our fans and our sponsors. But we're going to be accountable for that now. And we're going to start to turn the corner, and this is what change looks like. And he described the steps that the organization would take to change, and then followed through with ensuring that there were budgets to enable the work. A lot of times people think diversity, equity, and inclusion is grassroots free work. It's not. We need budgets. We need people behind us that are supportive and that can enable it. And so my brief answer is that it starts from the top. It starts with the CEO buckling down, getting serious, and then forcing people in the organization to behave in a way that is reflective of what the company wants to be. And if they don't, there's the door.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I'm going to turn the page a little bit, and let's talk about last summer. Last summer, as the world witnessed the killing of George Floyd, a universal uprising occurred as many around us who once may have doubted it could now visually see that racial inequity persists. In your experience, how do you create those compassionate or safe spaces? Sue-Min, you mentioned it in the last response, to discuss social justice concerns. And they could be widespread. It doesn't only have to be about race. It could be about gender issues. It could be about LGBTQ issues. But how, in our organizations, in our communities, how can we create that safe space for those conversations around race and race relations?
Yeah, I would say that one of the things that I think is so important is that we value progress over perfection. I see too often, particularly among, professional communicators, that they're so concerned about being perfect that then means silence. I think we saw that over and over again. One of the kind of remarks that I heard also within the communications field is like, we don't know what to say. And that's not surprising, because if we are not living, diverse lives, it's hard to be then, I think, a true leader within many of our organizations. You can't lead diverse teams. You can't be truly a communicator if you're saying that we're only going to speak to total market or mainstream. Like, no, you know what, niche, all of this kind of multicultural is the mainstream. So when I think about, some of the steps that we can take, I think we can't wait for this cataclysmic events to happen. These kind of creating those safe spaces happen every day. In our organization, when I was with Porter Novelli, I think back to 2016, the summer of 2016, and with the unjust killings of unarmed Black men at the hands of police. Gosh, I remember that summer specifically with Philando Castile and Alan Sterling and many others. And I remember, like, the managing director of one of our offices just brought our group together in a room, and it wasn't perfect by any means. It was stumbly and awkward and all of that. But it was just a space where we could be real with each other and have these conversations that really explored our feelings versus letting people mourn silently. And I think too often that is the case. So I think it's just let's value progress over perfection, and that's the willingness to make mistakes.
I like that. I like that. Zinga, I remember Mosaic. Mm-hmm. Mosaic was a place where you could have a safe space. And I know that was back in Atlanta Hawks, so I'm taking you back down memory lane. I apologize. But can you talk about how you've created some of those safe spaces, whether it's with your current employer, previous employers? Can you share?
Well, I think first and foremost, Stacey, if you're going to create a safe space, we have to be honest about what's wrong. Oftentimes, we don't start in the right place. in terms of moving DEI, because we're not being real about what's the actual problem, right? So when I think about some of the work that I've been able to do over time, it's because I've had to step back and really think about how was this country founded, right? We were founded on principles of segregation. We were segregated by race. The blacks are over here, the whites are over here. We were segregated by gender. We were segregated by religion. We were segregated by educational experiences, who had education, who didn't. And it goes on and on and on. And so if we think about corporations, corporations are just a microcosm of America and us being founded on principles of segregation. And so it's not very strange to think that people stay to themselves at work or stay in their comfort zones, because that's just what we've been conditioned to do. And so when I approach the work and think, how can I create a safe space, I think about intersectionality. Because no matter what, when you think about segregation, we still intersect in some ways. The four of us on this stage, we intersect from our gender for sure. And perhaps other dynamics of our family lives. We're all mothers, you know, there are different things that we bring. So when I create programs for diversity, equity, and inclusion, I think about what topics are gonna touch every single person in this room, regardless of their race, their gender, their socioeconomic background, their parental status, their sexual orientation, whatever the difference may be. There's something that connects all of us. Let's talk about these things first and foremost, so that we can start to look around and see, okay, well then we do have some things in common. Because I think when you find commonality, then it's okay to start to peel back the layer of the onion, break down the walls, and then have empathy for one another. So I would say intersectionality is the way that I've approached the work.
Oh, you're getting into my next topic.
Oh, sorry.
But before we go to intersectionality, we're going to hit that. Deja, I want to ask you one question specifically about these race-based disconnects that we have. And then how, and I'm thinking of what you've done with the Metro Chamber, or maybe even with Urban RX, or in any of your experiences, kind of how do you create more allies and bridge those current race-based disconnects that we have through whether it's a safe space or psychological safety, but how do you have those conversations?
Yeah, and Sumi has been a part of a lot of the conversations that we had at the Metro Atlanta Chamber. And I will jump off of what Sunmi and Nzinga just said. I think leading with empathy, first and foremost, to me is critical. If you're going to create safe space, if you're going to break down sort of the bridges and the divide that is clearly there, right, in this country with regard to race, in a corporate space, I think if we simply choose to lead with empathy, we will get there faster. And I think that what Sunmi was also saying about valuing progress over perfection is important. We will get it wrong. Somebody will come to the meeting and will be offended. Somebody will not like what we said. Somebody won't even like that we called the meeting. I mean, and we just have to acknowledge that and push through with courage, you know, either way. So for me at the Chamber in particular, that was, all of those things were really important as we went about the work, especially specific to racial equity and trying to advance racial equity in this community. One of the things that I would say pretty constantly, it seemed like every day, is that the time is now. And clearly what we have been doing up until this point, it has worked to a degree, but it hasn't worked to the degree that we all want it to work. And so we must do something different. We must bring innovative thinking to the table, and we need to bring more voices to the table as well, and action being critical, right? I know one of the questions you were going to ask was about pledges, and is it a pledge? Should you sign the pledge? And I kept saying, we don't need another pledge, y'all. Like, we need action, right? But at the core of all of that for me, and I would even say for Katie Kirkpatrick, who was my leader, you know, at that organization, leading with empathy was the starting place for sure.
Thank you for that, Deja. And I'll say this, we're on an agility journey at the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta, and one of the tenets is progress over perfection. And then as it aligns with diversity, equity, and inclusion, I think that's a great intersect for diversity, equity, and inclusion, and for being agile, whether it's being agile in a conversation around diversity, equity, and inclusion, or around production. So thank you for sharing that. So intersectionality, you took my topic, one of my favorite topics. You know, it's a term coined by Kimberly Crenshaw in the 1980s. Intersectionality pushes us to recognize that we all represent multiple and simultaneous identities that inform the way we engage the world and the way the world engages us. So what strategies do you employ to make certain that the varied identities, experiences of employees are considered when developing programming and making policies? And Deja, I'd like to start with you.
You know, the first thing that comes to mind for me is really just modeling the importance of appreciating intersectionality first and foremost. So normally when I introduce myself, I start off by saying I'm somebody's mama, right? I have 2 black boys who are beautiful and brilliant. I am married to a fine black man as far as I'm concerned. You know, so I start to try to model some of this idea that I am multi-layered as a human. I am a woman of faith. You know, I am a person who has a very loud laugh. I tend to, take up a little bit of space in a room if I'm allowed to, or if I feel like I am courageous enough to do that. So I try to lead with that as a model for people, and I think that that's important. When I do that, I see others begin to sort of step into their uniqueness and appreciate the dimensions of diversity that all of us bring around the table.
Sue, anything to add there?
Gosh, I just love that so much, because I think that moment of just being really open and honest with who you are definitely does model for everyone, like, hey, maybe I can then share that element of who I am. One thing that I might add to that is, you asked about, like, how do we create these programs for these different, let's say, groups or dimensions of diversity? And I think that's probably where a mistake can happen, is when we don't include the very people that we are trying to support and impact are part of that. There's that phrase that we always use in diversity, equity, inclusion, which is nothing about us without us. And I think it's really, really critical. I see right now, especially during this pandemic, that we're trying to come up with all these different solutions, not just around diversity, equity, inclusion, although that's huge, but just even just generally. And we see like a wholesale kind of rejection of even like the most awesome things, because people aren't a part of that. And they're not a part of asking or being asked, like, what is it that we need? What is it that you need? And so, I mean, I would say that that is a really critical part as we move forward. Like, let's lock arms in terms of co-creating what this future is for us, for our organizations, for what we believe that diversity, equity, and inclusion means.
Can I piggyback on that, please? Sumi, you brought something up that is so critically important for us to discuss, I think, which is including the people that we are trying to impact. I'm thinking specifically about George Floyd's murder and how quickly corporations were on social media, whether it was on Facebook or Instagram or whatever social handle they chose, very quickly writing about their commitment to racial equity and their commitment to ensuring that we didn't have to witness anything like that again. The challenge with that is that there weren't people of color in the rooms when those messages were being created. And so it felt for many people like blackwashing an issue, or being very reactive without having a lot of good information about why we're even speaking in the first place. Is this our place to speak on this topic? What work have we done in our organization historically that would even make us have a right to speak on a topic? And because of the lack of inclusion of people that would have been able to say, hey, sounds a little heavy, your language sounds a little flowery, we didn't have those people to be honest with us. And so corporations, many corporations, unfortunately, came across very inauthentically around the issues. And we saw a lot of money being pledged from big companies to erase, racial injustice. but those checks haven't been cashed. I think that's what Disha was talking about. So, you know, we have to have the right people in the rooms and ensure that we have the right information and empathy and understanding of the issue before getting on Instagram and Twitter talking about racial equality.
Can I
Amen.
just really, I'm
Go-
sorry, do
go
you
ahead.
mind?
I'm sorry.
So
No,
I
go right
I
ahead.
do want to piggyback because man, Nzinga, what you just said is so very important. UPS after, and I'm new to UPS, I'm 100 days in, right? But after George Floyd's death, Carol Tomei, who was our CEO, sent a message to all of our employees. So it was more of an internal focus, wanting the people to know that that she understood that people were hurting right now, or then, and that the company was going to be looking at what we could do to play a role, right? It wasn't sort of empty statements, but it was, hey, I know people are hurting and we have a role to play. So they actually took time to think about what that role could be and should be. They decided to, you know, there was a philanthropy aspect to it, but because it was thoughtful, we have spent the money. Right? We have, the checks have been cashed because we actually didn't just, you know, make a broad commitment because everybody else was doing it. We really thought specifically about where UPS could play a role and what our people could. We even did things like, you know, running pay equity and looking at it through the lens of race. We have done that. We committed to it and we did it. And we made some adjustments if we needed to make adjustments, but we didn't need to make many adjustments, right? Because we were doing the right thing long before George Floyd. So I think all of that is very important. To be thoughtful, I think is what Nzinga is saying, and authentic at the same time. But it requires you to pause and think, what should my company be doing that is aligned to our values, what is aligned to, you know, what our customers expect, what our employees expect, and then to hold yourself accountable to doing it. Yeah.
Thank you for that. And many organizations are doing a lot, or saying a lot. But the question is, especially internal to an organization, so let's talk about that a little bit, because those decisions are hard to make. Are there challenges associated internally, because all of you all are in communications or have a part in communications, associated with responding to those national conversations? Is there a room you go into? Is there a decision matrix? Yes, we're going to respond to this one. No, we're not going to respond to this one. But how do you get around that workplace taboo of talking about race at work? Or, of course, some of those conversations have political undertones. How do we get around saying we're still going to make a statement, or we're still going to talk about this at work, but how do we get around that taboo culture of, hey, we can't talk about race at work? How do we do that?
I don't know that I think it's not taboo any longer. I mean, I think the days of the topic of race being taboo are behind us. And I think this is one of the fortunate things that has resulted from the untimely death of George Floyd. I think, in particular, Black leaders in corporate America who perhaps were very focused on protecting themselves and ensuring that they could have their livelihood in place. And one of the ways that they protected self was by shrinking themselves and not speaking up. I think there was a reckoning for Black leaders in corporate America. And by and large, people have decided that, you know what, I have to say something. I have to speak my truth. So I think that is worth noting. But as Nzinga said it earlier, I think this idea of talking about race not being taboo in the workplace, it really has to start from the top, you know. So I mentioned just Carol Tomei and the message that she sent and how we have reinforced the focus on racial equity at UPS. The other thing that we did after George Floyd was look at our board. And we've added in the span of a year and a half 4 board members to our board who are all women and people of color, right? And so right now, and I looked up the stat right before we got on here, women and people of color make up 40+% of UPS's board. So it's not just the CEO, but it's the governance above the CEO that really is beginning to represent the importance of inclusion and representation. And then they are then holding the company accountable, right, to making these things core to the DNA as we talked about earlier.
jump in because what you're saying is absolutely correct, but there's a layer below the CEO and the board where the work happens.
Yeah.
And to your question, do people get together in rooms to discuss, okay, what are we going to put on Twitter? They do. So there's communications teams and several people that will sit in a room and say, okay, this crisis just happened. How is it impacting our brand? Should we say something? If so, what should we say? Should we stay silent? And if we do stay silent, what implications will that have on our brand? I mean, this is not random, right? So when you go to Twitter and you go to Instagram and you see a company said something, it didn't randomly get there. There were lots of people that had to take part in those discussions. And I think, again, what ends up happening is that in many times, communications teams are not diverse. The communications industry is not very diverse. And anybody in the industry will tell you that. I mean, it's not a secret. And so if you are sitting in a room of homogenous people that have a very narrow lens to an issue, and they're being asked to communicate broadly in a big way about it, they're going to miss something. And they're going to piss people off and perhaps make it worse for their brand than better. And so to Disha's earlier point, sometimes it's okay to pause. Sometimes it's okay to be silent, not say anything. Inform yourself, get educated, learn what is going on, and then perhaps over time, then you can really have input that would make a material difference. But it's not okay to just talk on an issue without information.
The one thing that I might just add to that, I think that's why it's so critical to have roles, I think, like ours. And hopefully those roles in all organizations have some, meat behind it so that we are able to fully counsel and serve the organization in the best way that we can for the reasons that we're there. I will agree with something that Disha said about, taboo. Like, I think we cannot perpetuate any of those conversations as being taboo. That is very counter to what we just talked about in the very beginning about creating psychological safety, about creating those courageous conversations and spaces. And frankly, they shouldn't be courageous. They should just be conversations. And then the other part of what you asked about in terms of like, oh, we shouldn't talk about that because it's political. Guess what? So much of our identities have been politicized. And so when we say that blanket statement, like, oh, that's political, that is completely turning our backs against all of the people that are within our organizations and then silence. And we know what silence means. Silence always benefits the tormentor, not the victims of those injustices.
Right. Wonderful. We have a few minutes left, and we've talked a lot about the organizations where you've worked and a lot of things that we can do in the workplace, but I want to get a little personal. So you shared a lot. Now, as an individual, what can I do? What can the folks that are watching us? They're either in a corporate setting or they're in their community. They might be in their place of worship. We have some students watching, so they're in their schools. To create a sense of belonging across difference, what can I do as an individual? And we'll start with Disha.
So this is a daily affirmation for me, from me to myself. Take up space, play big, bring your whole self, regardless of what they think and what they might say. I think that for me, that if we can all choose to do that, right, the world would be a better place, and for sure our workplaces would be better. I had a mentee who was really struggling to bring her whole self to work. And I was listening to her, and I was so troubled by what she was saying, and I ended up asking her, how do you ever expect to become who you are meant to be if you are not bringing your whole self to every room that you enter, whether that is at work or in something you are doing after work? You won't ever achieve your full potential if you are deciding that you're not going to bring your whole self, right? And so I think that for me, that's core to it. If we can all lead by example in that way, I think we will begin to make progress much sooner than what we've experienced in the past.
Alrighty, thank you. Sunmi?
Oh gosh, and lucky us that Disha does bring her full self to everything. So I'm definitely blessed by her and seeing, and you too, Stacy, with how you all show up. I will say for me, I think a lot about my faith. As how I try to operate in this world. And when we can go into so much complexity about how we want to solve for problems, I try to think about this like, how can I be a blessing? How can I bear witness? How can my life be a prayer? So I try to just really think about it that way of, how can I be helpful in these times that we're in?
Thank you, Sue Me.
And Sunmi means every word of what she just, so does Disha. These are truth tellers on the stage, which is so important. I needed Sunmi about a year ago. I called her, I needed her help. And she didn't flinch an eye. What can I do? How can I jump in? I was getting flooded with emails. I was like, listen, leave me alone, lady, okay, I asked for help, but I didn't need that much help. She means it when she says that she gives, she's a giver. And I think that's really important. You have to give without wanting anything back from the person because you may not get it back. But for me, I would say the answer to your original question, I think about my uncle who passed away. He died of AIDS, complications from AIDS. He was gay. No one in our family knew he was gay. And so until the very end when he got very sick. And so we were all told that he had cancer. That was just, Uncle Dexter died of cancer. And I realized that that did him a disservice, his life a disservice. He wasn't able to fully express himself even in death. And so when I got to the Hawks and when I did other things in my life, I've always tried to attach myself to the LGBTQ community because it's a community that I'm not necessarily a part of in terms of my sexual orientation, but it's a community that in many ways has experienced being othered, being mistreated, and certainly needs allyship. And so I would say for anyone wondering what can you do to be a real DEI champion, put yourself in a community of people that need you, need your voice, and in a community that you're not necessarily familiar with. It's easy to be empathetic for things that we're familiar with. Get uncomfortable. This is not comfortable. This is not easy. Let's get uncomfortable, put ourselves alongside others, and lift up.
Yeah.
Wow. So, my notes, I hope you all took more than I did. At the end, Deja says for us to have DE&I in our DNA, we need to bring our whole self to work. Sumi said, have faith and help others, be a blessing to others. And Zinga says, be an advocate, be a courageous advocate in a place where you might be a little uncomfortable. That was just the last question. The first 6 questions, I hope you all got those. Thank you all for your wonderful candor, your authenticity, and the experiences that you all brought were just amazing. So thank you for this time on the panel. I appreciate you.
Thank you.
I'll now turn it back over to Sharman, who's going to give us some instructions.
Please welcome once again the CEO of the YWCA of Greater Atlanta, Ms. Sharman Goins.
Wow. That's all I can say. I have been listening and receiving texts and emails and going, wow, Sharman. Thank you so much for your candor, your honesty, your integrity, and bringing your whole self to this forum today. I wish there were a whole audience out there. You audience, join me in applause. Throw it in the chat and let them hear from you, because you guys have really, really, you've done more. You exceeded my expectations, and that's pretty hard to do because I was already up there. I was right. I promised you vibrant discussions, and we were certainly not disappointed. And most importantly, I hope you learned something and are taking some nuggets. Stacy, thank you for being the moderator of I won't call you what we call you in behind closed doors, but you have really brought this together. Sunmi, Deja, and Zing, thank you. Just that's all I can say. Sometimes, you know what, less is best. You have empowered us today, so thank you so much. So now, I hope everybody in the audience is all logged in and registered to be able to participate actively. So stay with us. It's your turn now. Go to the auditorium at the top of your screen, but listen to me before you do that. You're going to click there and enter your name and email address when prompted to do so. Then you'll be taken directly to one of the virtual breakout rooms. There are individual facilitators for each breakout room that will continue the discussion our panel has started by asking you specific questions. I believe it's 4 or 5. Each virtual breakout room will answer the same questions. There should be no more than about 15 people logged into each room. I want you to remember that these are compassionate spaces. No one is recording you. Our facilitators are not allowed to take notes. You are free to interact and bring your authentic self. So at the end of 50 minutes, we'll end the breakout room sessions and return to a virtual space together. We're going to come back into an auditorium and talk, and kind of hear a little bit of what we learned. We thought we were going to be able to talk, but we've learned that the platform will only allow you to put questions in the chat. So if you are comments in the chat, we want to hear your comments in the chat to share with us some of the things that you're learning as a result. So we're going to take approximately 2 minutes to make the transition from where you are now in the ballroom to go to the breakout rooms. Pretend you're down here at the Atlanta Marriott Marquis with us. You got to go from one room to another. And if you have technical questions, please go to the informational booth, and I believe there's a slot on there that says technical assistance here. So go and get those. So at this point, we are going to go out in the breakout, and we'll see you in about 50 minutes.
Thank you, Sharman. We ask that all participants log into their breakout rooms within the next 2 minutes. Access to rooms will close 8 minutes after that. Now, each room will discuss the same questions. Each room has a facilitator who will guide you through the discussion of specific diversity, equity, and inclusion questions. Nothing in any room will be recorded. Have a great breakout session.
Hi, my name is Cheryl Naja, and I'm the Director of Pro Bono and Community Service at the law firm of Alston and Bird. You know, one of the misconceptions about diversity, equity, and inclusion is the thought that you can build a program, hire the right people in the workplace, and hold the trainings, establish affinity groups, all of those things, take certain steps, and you've addressed DE&I. And so that's off your list. In your personal life, maybe you do more diverse reading, and you incorporate all these things in your life to help you as a person be really attuned to DE&I. And as a parent, maybe you've taken lots of steps to be able to raise children, have good conversations, etc. But in fact, the misconception is it's not a checklist. DE&I, it's not the things that you just tick off a list and suddenly make a few changes in your life or as a parent and you're done. It's continuous learning. But more important, and it ties directly to this event, it's conversations. It's learning to listen. It's continuous learning. It is staying attuned in conversations with people, sometimes about subjects and topics that are hard, and it's looking at things with fresh eyes and an open heart. So this is my third year on the Conversations Planning Committee, which is, I love doing it because it really helps me each year with my personal growth, and I can't wait to join in the conversations today.
Hi, my name is Jennifer Gwynn, and I am the founder and executive director for Pebble Tossers. We're a youth service organization here in Atlanta, and we bring together kids from all over Greater Atlanta to serve those in need. When we look at the concept of diversity, equity, inclusion as part of our learning curriculum, we try and teach kids that when they're serving another person, regardless of where they are in their journey in life, and also where the child is in their life too. We've got kids from, all over, truly all over, and they each have something to give. They each have something to share. They also each have something to learn from not only who they're serving with, but also who they're serving. So for us, DEI is incorporated into the curriculum that we teach our kids, and it is just an important life lesson that when going forward in their journey, we've got to respect each other, we've got to learn from each other, we've got to care about each other.
Welcome again, the CEO of the YWCA of Greater Atlanta, Ms. Sharman Goins.
Thank you, Marty. I want to thank all of you again for spending such a big part of your day with us and engaging in these important conversations. We trust you've learned something, you either relearned something, or you're going to do something to make DEI part of your DNA. Before we leave, perhaps there are a couple of you that were in the rooms that want to share with us some of your experiences. If you do, type it in the chat box and we'll read it out so that everyone can hear. And while you're doing that, I want to give some special thanks out. I want to thank our Conversations Planning Committee, Cynthia, Jen, Leslie, Stacy, Cheryl, Ashley, Madeleine, Keisha, and Soraya. Thank you for all you did to make this day possible. Special thanks to our DEI panel of experts, our moderator, Stacy McCall, and a special thanks for the last 50 minutes to our facilitators. We really could not have done this portion without you. And I know that some of you have been with us since we've been on this journey, starting in 2014. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Again, thanks to our board and our board of directors and our sponsors, and all of you who have attended. So do we have any questions or any comments in the chat yet? I don't hear any yet. But thank you for taking the time today to be with us. And we always like to close out this forum with some key action items. And we've got 4 for you today. 1, engage in a conversation with someone not your race about the privileges you know you have or those that you do not have based on your racial identification. 2, engage a colleague in a 20-minute conversation about why diversity based on race, gender, or sexuality matter in the workplace. And the third one, we are going to direct you, and we will send these out to you, but we are going to direct you to our YWCA website, to our 21-day challenge. On that, I want you to choose just one day or one action item that you're going to take and use to educate yourself. And the last one, vote. Let your voice be heard. Vote. And then go back and hold your elected officials accountable. Thanks so much. Help us keep the conversations going. Please, we welcome all donations to YWCA of Greater Atlanta. Go to our website, and we'll send this out to you as well, our YWCA Atlanta Conversations.swell.give. But we will send that to you. Please help us keep the conversations going. Thank you.
This concludes the 8th Annual Forum on Race and Gender, sponsored by the YWCA of Greater Atlanta. Thank you so much for your participation.